paper, which was about managing the system, which was, I understand Professor Anand's point goes after to that. I was kind of thinking, okay, I'll go through the functions of money, right? Income account, medium of exchange, mode of payment, store of value, right? And so I was going to have a section that was about monetary policy. It was about the imperative for managing the system. So I understand it as a friendly admonition to add part 4 in order to bring our worlds at least somewhat closer together.
Okay, so here's the list. I have, and if I miss someone, that's the time to tell me. David, then Rachel, Yaniv, Roy, Katarina, Michael, and Barak. Maria. David?
Can we turn the screen off unless the conference is being sponsored by Microsoft?
I don't know. The answer is that I don't know, but I don't want to waste time on that.
There we go.
David.
So this is fascinating, and like all of your sort of papers in this theme, I've learned so much about money and so on. So what I want to do is to invite you to say something about the concept-context divide that we started on yesterday and that came up in Roy's paper. And there are a couple possible concepts and how concepts travel across context. This is partly responsive to your question about whether or not how the history works as the vehicle for the story. I might think that having more concepts and the concept of travel earlier on might help people who aren't otherwise good at spotting what you're doing. But there's also so that's the presentational. But there's a genuine question that I have, which is, to what extent is something like money being credit, or money being credit that's made by the state at some foundational level, even though it can delegate that, versus money as sort of taxes deferred? What of these concepts do you think of as relatively invariant across the different historical episodes? And then we would change it, we'd alter it, and then bank money of a certain kind comes in after the British, et cetera, et cetera. And which of these do you think that the concept is itself in some, so what's relatively invariant across the many contexts you've studied money in? And that would be the concept that travels, and then how do you sort of settle it in different contexts?
Start already with pairing
Which is very
Rachel.
Okay, I'll be quick. I also learned a huge amount from your paper. I wanted to ask you 2 questions. First is the point about commensurability. So in the abstract, and I think in the talk, you used the phrase that money creates commensurability, but in the paper, you write that money creates a commensurable unit to measure value. And those strike me as 2 different points, and I wondered, does money create commensurability on your view? Does it presume commensurability, or does it purport to commensurability? I'm not sure it makes a difference to your argument, but I would love to hear your thoughts about what work it's actually doing in terms of how we value things. And then the second point is just that I thought what I took to be kind of the central claim of your paper, which was so arresting and eye-opening, which I would have also liked to read more about, is both as a kind of pivotal historical moment and as a radical reorientation of our understanding of a political obligation, is when you write that when the U.S. government gave a greenback for land or labor and agreed to take the note back for value, this packaged political obligation in the form of a credit, or in other words, it packaged the political contribution into a dollar form. That claim just strikes me as amazing, and I would have liked to sort of hear it expanded a bit more, because its implications could be enormous in terms of how we understand the political community. So I would love to, if indeed that's the moment at which this becomes possible, I don't know historically that that's the case, but if it is indeed the case, then I would sort of like for the paper to say that in some way, and also I would want to know what your thoughts are about what in fact that does to the nature of political obligation.
So, Rachel, are you asking me, is the Civil War the moment?
No, the moment of
making money out of
yes.
Right. So I think that I will tie this to David's question. So pairing works in the sense that I think it's a phenomenal, arresting constitutional innovation that societies do again and again, and that we don't think about. And so I love the question, because it's exactly what the paper wanted us to do. It just struck me that we kind of never theorize that moment, right? The modern monetary people or the Keynesians or post-Keynesians are willing to say it's credit, money is credit, but they don't take that extra step of thinking what that actually means. And this, without taking the time to theorize, I mean, this is really research. we need political theorists and philosophers to really think about this. David, to your question, I think it's a great question, sort of what's invariant, and I guess I think that context and concepts are constantly flowing back and forth. It's kind of a dialectical thing to me, without wanting to choose one, and that I wouldn't be so much an essentialist to say that money is always this, but I am enough of a conceptualist to say, again and again, societies do something we recognize as money because it is this. Right? So, and if I can explain those things, I'm happy. Right? I don't really need to say money is essentially this. It happens again and again. Coin was this. Coin was the conversion of political obligation into a token containing metal. Right? So, and that was a formative moment in, at least in the English case in, the 7th century. It was formative for the Romans too. I mean, so, and just briefly on commensurability, it's a really interesting thing we have in common to be obsessed with this question. I think value is different from linear space or from weight. It's an unknown thing, and it's a sort of pragmatic mode of measuring it to create a token that has some kind of shared reference point, and then send that token into circulation so that through the practice of exchange we get values attached to objects. Right? So so that's the commensurability that I mean. And there would only be, a shoe would only be worth, how many shoes would only be worth a house. In a certain kind of society, a certain number of shoes would be worth a house. In another society, it would be an incoherent question. Right? They had a different kind of money. So I think commensurability is a very constructed quality, constructed out of money, because value is a very elusive entity, and that's just the way that pragmatically we go about nailing it down.
Yaniv and Roy.
Thank you. I'll join, the comments that said that this was fascinating and really tremendous paper and all your work. I also liked the turning back to the greenback debate as a moment that elucidate the claim about the character of money. And I saw that you draw on the wonderful paper by Bruce Carruthers and Sarah Babb on the greenback debate. And I want to go back to one of the main claims of that paper, not the main claim, that in order to function smoothly and uncontroversially, in other words, in order to function as money's political aspects need to be hidden, need to be disguised. That goes back to, I think it was Lisa's comments to Waze yesterday about the role of ideology in all this. And so in the greenback debate, there was the naturalization aspect, and I know that you wrote about naturalization and also the metaphors of blood and water are natural. Here in this paper, I don't find it as much. The issue of naturalization, a little bit in the conclusion, but I'm also thinking that if in the 19th century and the gold controvertibility was helping this naturalization aspect, maybe in the 20th century, in order to do the neutralization, you don't need a naturalization so much, but other means of neutralization. And I'm thinking that the constitutional analysis of money, that law can be one of these aspects of neutralization. Another one can be the scientificization of money, exactly the vice versa. The claim that markets make money and not money make markets is exactly this ideology, is exactly this neutralization. This is kind of like more of a question for you to comment on, but also an invitation to explicate more on this in the paper. Although I do realize that you asked about do you need to explain the nature of the attack? And I'm inviting you to amplify the attack. I know that it will expose the attack, but it might miss some readers. So this is my question and comment.
So, two things. One is they're related, and they go back to this question of what kinds of determination we get out of different money creation systems. So, talk about slavery is this moment when you can see possibly, but I'm not sure if there's a real connection, that different modes of money creation in terms of their dominance work different. So in the north you have lots of banking, in the south you have almost no banking during slavery, or very, very little compared to in the north. Is the money creation story part of what allows so much of the southern economy to be shielded from the kind of capital accounting that bank infused economic activity always requires? That is part of what allows for the thriving of slavery, being shielded in part from the banking system as the major mode of supplementing currency, is one kind of question, right? Or is the fact that there is slavery just not related to money creation? And the more general point about this is the question about when, or what our exaggerations are about the dominance or totality of money as the system of valuation. Right? So we all actually live in multiple systems of valuation. When we talk about the economy as if money values everything, and then we back off sometimes and say, oh, well, academic work is valued differently, or friendship is valued differently, and then we might make a very, very long list, down to the point where we get to, yes, well, all my unremunerated labor on the farm is valued both in money and not in money, and some days I do capital accounting, but I don't actually hand out the food on the basis of the accounting, and whatever. So is there sort of a turning point at which we think the money system has become so dominant that it is right to talk about it as basically a general system of valuation which makes commensurability? Or is it always this place where we have somewhat hidden conventional commensurability that's okay for just more and more and more things, almost to the point where we just assume that it's the way, even though, if we're paying attention, we know that theoretically it's not doing commensurability, and that it's only a mechanism for getting close enough, but in a sense then always still practical.
Before the other comments, you either can respond and then I'll take them, or I'll take them and then you respond.
So why don't I take these fast?
Sure.
Because I might forget. So to take them fast, I actually disagree with Carruthers and Bab that money must be forgotten. I think it should be politically debated, which we may be on the same wavelength there, and I think the gold standard was a brilliant way of trying to make it get forgotten and trying to make it look like an external value. It'd be really interesting to talk about how economics is neutralizing money in a new way, right? So that we forget about it. And Roy, these are huge questions. I actually don't think of slavery as incommensurable with banking at all. There was all sorts of finance that was run through the banks in on the plantation system, I do think of it as a commodification point, which is maybe then where your comment went, but it's really interesting to think about the monetarization of those transactions, buying and selling people, and that is the way that for me it relates to the monetization point. And to follow that, maybe or maybe not, to your question about whether there's a tipping point where so many things seem to be valued in money, I do think there's a qualitative change in the end of the 19th century, and I think it is because banking changes the landscape, right? I mean, there'd always been monetary privity before that. Coin is a very unwieldy system. You have to get bullion, you have to take it to the mint, there are these awkward forms of credit, bills of exchange are nothing like retail banking. So, the mythology that bills of exchange somehow become retail banking, it's just a fantasy. And retail banking just blows the money supply out of the water, and it turns out people wanted that, are willing to hold that much money, and so I think it does transform day-to-day exchange at that point.
Super. So we have Katerina, Michael, Barak, and Maria.
Yeah, so I think, just first of all, a comment. I think what is interesting in the discussion we've had also with the comments today is actually who gets to talk and theorize about something. So who talks about markets when Lisa talks about information? Economists have done this already, can philosophers add anything? And I think here we have another debate again about money, which always seems to be like an economic thing. And I think your contribution in your life's work, and also Roy's, is of course to bring the law and the state and our political community into money. And it brings us back to some of the conversations we had yesterday. How is it that economists so easily always forget and never engage with the kind of arguments that we're making? That it's actually, a political community thing, this money, nothing else. And even if it's a convertibility, it is nonetheless something that works only if you have a political community standing behind that. So I just want to, again, so in an interdisciplinary discourse, think again, who gets to comment on what? And just as a little anecdote, I have a colleague at the Carnegie Law School, he wrote a book on the Fed. And he presented it to the faculty, and everybody, and only the business community was commenting. And we had a conversation afterwards, and he said, I'm an administrative lawyer. I want to talk about this as like a governance design. The Fed was designed in a certain way that was an administrative, regulatory, constitutional issue, and nothing, and they don't even think that they have to talk to me again, just to law folks. So I just want to say, let's just be conscious of this and bridge this divide, which brings me to the one question that we asked. And so you said, shall I bring more constitutional law in? And I said, absolutely. I think just to make that upfront and clear how central this is also in the legal dialogue, I think you should emphasize this. I think you could de-emphasize, all this, the wrestling with different literatures. You can just reference other work of yourself and others. I don't think you have to overload your paper with all the stories about money necessarily. I think I would focus on yours and put the rest of it just once.
Michael.
I had three comments that require about 10 minutes of expositions.
So you have one.
So what I'll do is I'll telescope all three, and I'll use up a minute and a half. Okay, the first thing I wanted to ask, and there maybe there are questions, but I definitely want to invite Chris to expand upon them. So the first thing I wanted to ask is, you wrote a paper about money creating market. I wanted to know what money's role is in creating a public, and whether you think, in fact, market and public might be synonymous as far as you refer to them. The public is an important concept, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, but it's ever present, omnipresent in your paper. But it's never quite clear if by public you mean the state or society, and that's a problematic slippage. Sometimes it seems the state creates society. Other times, and you reference using Ariel Rohn's paper on Northerners, unlike Southerners, used to paying taxes, so that seems to be the society actually gave birth to a monetizing state. Okay, second point is democracy, right? So everyone from James Stewart to Charles Tilly pointed out how much money is given the citizens political leverage to the point where they're able to even resist the state, I presume is what you mean. True enough, on the other hand, it strikes me that money also creates a kind of political leverage that allows citizens, in fact, to utilize leverage over each other. So in that respect, we have a moment where the negotiation over monetized taxes might have been the birthplace of democracy. It might have been also the end of democracy. One at the same time. And the smallest point I have to make, which is an historical one, but I think an important one, because it might be an indication of all the kind of unconscious neoclassical assumptions we nevertheless fall back on. You're passing, oh, I'm sorry. No, there's nothing worse you can say about someone else. But, so you're passing half sentence on the hodgepodge of antebellum bank credit furnished a sorry substitute for, it's not quite clear what for, but I wonder how sorry it was, because in fact it did finance a rather dramatic American industrial takeoff in the 2.5 decades before Civil War. So, all right.
Barak.
Love the paper. Picking up a little bit what Katerina said. The question of how much government power is behind this, I think, is both underappreciated and also in certain circles totally appreciated. And maybe I'm being a little presentist about this, but I don't know about the world of constitutional law. I don't know about how much traction you get in a world where they think the requirement of purchasing health insurance is an intrusion, is a government overreach. I don't know how that world can take this world very seriously. But the idea in the contemporary moment of how much concentrated power a politically unaccountable group of people have is a really provocative moment when we're trying to think about what democracy means. I do think this is a kind of power that the crypto people appreciate and are scared of, probably appropriately. And maybe actually the rest of us are really appreciative that there is that concentrated power precisely because of the crypto people and because of the world of Brexit and Trumpism also. So I think there's a lot to unpack here right now in this moment. And I'll say one last thing. You sometimes use the word societies and sometimes use the word polity. And I think a better word is sovereign. I mean, there is this very remote source of authority that has extraordinary power over the way we spend our resources and the way we value things in society. And frankly, at this moment, I'm kind of appreciative that I have control over them.
Last but not least, Maria.
Very briefly, 2 points, conceptual, methodological. First, one of your own questions was whether this would be read as an attack on classical or neoclassical economics. And indeed, I didn't get that point. Because I don't think it must be so. So I think I read this with great interest. This is great. I think one can totally grant everything which is in this paper without including the methodology of classical or neoclassical economics. Very simple. Again, this is about modeling and simplifying and how far should it go and so forth. However, I don't see points which make that possible. The second point is for footnote 37, there appears the concept modernization and modernity. So I was wondering what kind of work that concept does. Related point. I just say one thing about the polity sovereign society point. I was deliberately being slippery there because I didn't want it to reduce to state and state making, because I actually think it's a community's political obligation. It can be different, and that can arise out of different communities. And I think I would love to talk much more with Michael and Barak and anybody else who kind of has a view on that. It's nice to use sovereign when you're talking medieval and early modern, and it seemed a little archaic. I probably had to cross out sovereign a bunch of times in the paper and put in polity because I was trying to avoid that connotation. But I have to figure out what's the best way to do it. And finally, thank you. I took notes on this. It's all very helpful.
Thank you.